Good Friday morning, everyone, and thank you for tuning in to yet another Sunrise Edition, our weekly Friday version of the Alan Fitz podcast, also known as The Chat. Good morning to everyone. My name is Alan Fitz, the host of the program this morning, and welcome into the show, live from our studios here in Amarillo, Texas. And as always, I want to welcome in our three main listening audiences, those that do agree with what we talk about. They do spread the word for us in positive ways, positive vibes, and we definitely appreciate that. High fives to those folks. Number two listening audience, well, they don't quite agree with everything that we talk about, but they do leave positive criticism out there, and we definitely appreciate that. And of course, last but not least, yeah, folks, we all know who I'm talking about. It's the haters out there. These are the people that inspire the chat to keep going, because in reality, well, they can't keep the chat from airing. They're kind of powerless. There's nothing they can do, and we just keep doing the chat out there just to aggravate the living hell out of them. Again, and welcome all of our listeners, and you as well out there, as we get started with this Sunrise edition of the chat. Folks, for those of you that have followed my podcast close now for a year, you remember on the very first podcast that I talked about that there are two things that we do not talk about here on the Alan Fitz podcast, and that is religion and politics. Being in the media for the decades and decades that I've been in, I've learned early in my radio and podcasting careers that this is two things that people never agree upon, and it can really start a stink when you start talking about religion and politics. But we're going to make an exception, folks, this morning on the podcast, and we are going to talk a little bit about politics, because there seems to be a very hot topic out there, if you will. And it's President Donald Trump, Donald J. Trump, attempting to circumvent the 22nd Amendment to the United States Constitution. Now, I think everybody knows that a president can only run 2 terms. He can only be elected 2 terms in office. We're going to talk about the 22nd Amendment and where it actually got changed. And actually, there are, for those of you that have been watching the title card all week on alanfitz.com, it did say that there was one way he could do it. Actually, there's 2, okay? And I did not get around to changing that, or maybe I did, I don't remember. But we're going to talk a little bit, go into detail about the 22nd Amendment, why the 22nd Amendment was put into place in the United States Constitution, and where the 12th Amendment seems to seal the loophole that keeps presidents from running for more than 2 terms. Now, remember, in this podcast, a lot of times you may hear me say the word running for a 3rd term. And keep in mind that the word running actually comes back to elected. And the word elected, I want you to put this in your mind. I want you to put it on the back burner, if you will, for right now, because the word elected is going to be the key here that will allow President Donald Trump, and Mr. President, I hope you're listening to this morning, because this is your answer if you want to seek another term. A lot of these, I guess you call them election predictors out there, have they can't seem to figure out how Donald Trump can get around this. I mean, to circumvent the 22nd Amendment and become president again for a third term. And before we get into the heart of this podcast this morning, I want to mention to you, and a lot of you folks out there, ladies and gentlemen, may not know this, and I'm not talking about George Herbert Walker. This is George W. or Judge George W. Bush's daddy that was president first. We're not referring to the daddy on the podcast. We're referring to the son from Crawford, Texas, who was the father-son president of the United States. Both George, and we call him W, both George W. Bush and President Bill Clinton both attempted to get the 22nd Amendment ratified to where they could seek another term. And of course, both presidents failed with that. Daddy Bush never did attempt this. Okay, he knew he couldn't do it. He wasn't going to fool with it. But some of the legal scholars out there seem to think that Donald Trump could be elected president for a third term, when in fact he cannot. And again, remember the word elected, ladies and gentlemen. This is where I'm going to explain to you that it does not take election to get him back into the Oval Office for the third time. Now, again, there are two different ways that he can circumvent the 22nd Amendment to the United States Constitution and hold a third term. But before we get into that, let's talk a little bit about the 22nd Amendment on this early Friday morning. What exactly is the 22nd Amendment? Well, it is written into the United States Constitution. And basically, and all of this is just in layman's language, it limits the number of times a person can be elected to the office of the President of the United States. That's 2 terms. It also additionally sets eligibility conditions for presidents who succeed to the unexpired terms of their predecessors. Now, let's break this down just a little bit. And I'm going to read to you what both Section 1 and Section 2 talk about on the 22nd Amendment. What I'm going to read to you is the actual text, the language of the bill, which is law. Section 1 says that no person shall be elected to the office of the president more than twice, and no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of president more than once. Now, we're going to back up a little bit here in just a moment. I'm going to explain to you what that means. Section 1 also goes on to say, but this article shall not apply to any person holding the office of president when this article was proposed by the Congress, and shall not prevent any person who may be holding the office of president or acting as president during the term which this article becomes operative from holding the office of president or acting as president during the remainder of such term. Section 2 says this article shall be inoperative unless it has been ratified as amended to the Constitution by the legislatures of 3/4 of the several states within 7 years from the date of its submission to the states by the Congress. Now, let's go back to Section 1 and let me explain to you where the confusion is that they can't only serve but one term after they've already been president. Now, where this breaks down, ladies and gentlemen, let me reread this to you again. No person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice, and no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of president more than once. Okay, let me clear up the confusion with that statement that is currently in law in the United States Constitution. Basically, what that is saying, and to break it down into layman's terms, would mean that, for an example, let's say that Donald Trump assumes the office of presidency. Let's say that currently J.D. Vance, okay, is president. Let's say, and we've got the midterms coming up. Okay, so Trump has been in office for, rather J.D. Vance. Again, we're saying J.D. Vance is president, not Donald Trump, okay? Let's say that J.D. Vance is currently the president of the United States, and he is up to the midterm, which puts him 2 years into the presidency. Let's say that he pulls a Richard Nixon and resigns. Remember, Richard Nixon was the only president, sitting president, I may add, in the United States history that resigned office of the president during the Watergate scandal. Now, what I'm about to tell you actually holds true with Lyndon Johnson, but he did not win re-election after Nixon resigned. Now, going back, we're going to say that J.D. Vance is currently the president of the United States. He resigns the office. Succession kicks in, so Trump would automatically become president and fulfill his term. That would put Trump in office for 2 years. Trump can then be re-elected president to serve for 4 years, which would come to 6 years total. He would then be able to run for president one more time, which would give him a total of 10 years. But let's say that J.D. Vance is currently the president right now, and next year he was to step down after 3 years in office. Trump would succeed to the presidency, but he could only run one more year, because if he ran a second year, it would put him over 10 consecutive years, 2 terms as president. So that's what that text of Section 1 is saying. They cannot be elected more than twice, nor can they serve a total of an unexpired term totaling more than 10 years by the United States Constitution. So that's what that little article is talking about, that he would only be able to run one term after filling an unexpired term. Now, breaking down why the 22nd Amendment came into play, we're going to go way back in time here for you history buffs out there. And we're going to talk about a man that basically served a 4th term as president, unprecedentedly, okay? He was unprecedented for 4 terms because they had no term limits back in the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt. The 22nd Amendment, ladies and gentlemen, was a reaction to FDR's election to an unprecedented 4-year term as president. But presidential term limits had long been debated in American politics. Okay, so Franklin Roosevelt made 4-term presidency. This is where it ended. The delegates of the Constitutional Convention, which took place back in 1787, considered the issue extensively. And they did an early draft of the U.S. Constitution back in those days to limit the president restricted to 1 7-year term. Ultimately, the framers got involved in this. They approved 4-year terms with no restriction on how many times a person can be elected president. So basically what happened in this is that Franklin D. Roosevelt amplified the long-standing debates over term limits. Basically what happened, ladies and gentlemen, is on his 4th term as president, he served 16 years. People got tired of him being president. It kind of goes back, there's no term limits to congressional members, okay? They can be in office, take an example, Bernie Sanders. I mean, they just don't have any term limits. And people, this country said, look, this is not fair. We need a fresh new face. So it all got twisted and turned, and I don't have enough time on this podcast to explain exactly how it happened. But it got ratified. Now, Thomas Jefferson, let me throw this up. He neared his halfway point through his 2nd term, and even himself said, if some termination to the service of the chief magistrate be not fixed by the Constitution or supplied by practice, his office, normally for years, would in fact become for life. And history shows how easily that degenerates into an inheritance. That was written by Thomas Jefferson. So, getting back to the presidency of Franklin D. Roosevelt, he became the only president in United States history to be elected for a 3rd and 4th term, which gave rise to concerns about a president serving unlimited terms. So, the 22nd Amendment was approved by Congress on March the 21st of 1947. And it was submitted to the state legislatures for ratification. This process took almost 4 years, ladies and gentlemen, but it was completed on February the 27th, 1951, when 36 of 48 states had ratified the amendment, and the provisions came into force on that date. Now, neither Alaska or Hawaii had been elected to a state at that point, so there were only 48 states in the United States. So, with this being said, the 22nd Amendment came into play February the 27th, 1951 is the official date it became law. Now, 80-year-old President Donald J. Trump wants to stay in office. The American people had a poll that we've looked at. As a matter of fact, we've looked at several polls, and the American people side with Donald J. Trump. They want him back in office, but no one can really figure out how to circumvent the 22nd Amendment. Now, let me tell you something else about the 22nd Amendment, and then I'm going to get into how Trump can actually circumvent this. and get back into office. The 22nd Amendment, as it's written right now, ladies and gentlemen, lacks a provision concerning the vice presidents. Okay? What that does is that opens the door for a possible loophole in this situation. Let me explain how that works. And we're going to go back to Richard Milhous Nixon in 1974. When a president resigns the office, is removed from office by impeachment, or he dies in office, the vice president automatically assumes the role. Now, this provision provides a seemingly perfect opportunity, okay, for Trump to run as vice president on the 2028 ticket if J.D. Vance is running as the president. Okay? Now, the same procedure exists for the vice president. The Speaker of the House, and we're talking about succession into the presidency, ladies and gentlemen. The Speaker of the House assumes the role if the acting president leaves office, and if the new president resigns, then the Speaker of the House, which would then be vice president, would assume the presidency. Now, that provision would allow the president to so-called bypass the elected restriction in the 22nd Amendment. And this has actually, folks, in American history, it's actually been done. And I'm going to take you back just a little bit, and then we'll fast forward into the podcast. And I'm going to tell you how Trump can do it two different ways. Again, we talked about Richard Nixon, okay? Back in 1974, and all you baby boomers out there will remember this, Nixon got involved in that Watergate scandal, sent some people into the Democratic National Convention, bugged it all up, wired it all up, and was listening to the strategies where he could figure out his strategy to become elected president again. Wiretapped, basically, and bugged the Democratic National Convention headquarters. Now, let me explain to you how this happened. How Gerald Ford circumvented, and there's the word again, elected. Remember I talked about at the beginning of the podcast, keep the word elected on your back burner up in your head. This is where elected is circumvented. When Richard Nixon was president and he stepped down from office, this is where everything became circumvented within itself of the election process. You baby boomers will remember that when Richard Nixon was president, Spiro Agnew was the vice president. Spiro Agnew, or we can call him now the late Spiro Agnew because he did pass away, was the former governor of Maryland. Then third in command was Gerald Ford, who was the Speaker of the House. When Spiro Agnew resigned the office of vice presidency, he basically stepped down because he was facing allegations and charges of income tax evasion. Gerald Ford, who was the Speaker of the House, stepped up to the vice presidency in succession. There was no elected process. To date, there's still no elective process for this to happen, okay? It's automatic. It's succession. Then, when the Watergate scandal came about and Richard Nixon was impeached, Nixon stepped down in 1974. Gerald Ford became the first and only man to excel into the presidency without the Electoral College. He was not elected in his own right as president of the United States. He excelled into the presidency, and the only way he was able to do that is the steps of succession into the presidency. So yes, there is a loophole open in the 22nd Amendment. However, in researching into the United States Constitution, ladies and gentlemen, the 12th Amendment basically seals the loophole, because the 12th Amendment says that no person constitutionally ineligible to the office of president shall be eligible to that of the vice presidency of the United States. Now, the gray area of the 12th Amendment, basically which President Trump could attempt to manipulate, lies in the loosely defined phrasing of constitutional ineligibility and the restrictions that fall under it. Now, the 22nd Amendment officially added a requirement of not having been elected president twice to the other constitutional eligibility requirements of the presidency. And what those say is being a natural-born citizen, at least 35 years old, and a resident within the United States for at least 14 years. Now, a lot of people throughout the years have argued that the 12th Amendment only includes the eligibility requirements specifically outlined in the Constitution's original provisions, which, ladies and gentlemen, they were present at the time that they did the ratification of the amendment. However, the language used in the 12th Amendment falls under the reference canon, since it broadly refers to constitutional ineligibility rather than the specific regulations that existed at the time. Therefore, the 22nd Amendment should be seen within the scope of the 12th Amendment. Basically, to break that down into layman's terms for you, Trump has already been in office for 2 terms. He has been elected 2 terms. Now, in his own right, it's only 2 terms. We all know about all that yada yada that went on with Biden. Trump claims he's been elected 3 terms because of all the ballot tampering, and that's not even a show that I'm going to do, because that goes broadly deep within politics. Yes, I understand what happened, but no, I'm not going to do it on this program. So, what that 22nd Amendment, being natural born, yada yada, this, that, and the other, the 12th Amendment, it seals it up, ladies and gentlemen. Basically, in layman's terms, what it is saying is, because, and it's not saying Donald J. Trump, it's talking about anybody, okay, that's been elected 2 terms of the office of the president, they're ineligible to become vice president. Okay, now, there is a stipulation loophole that's in this that Trump could possibly go for, but legal scholars say it would not work. Trump could actually serve as vice president of the United States after this term ends, okay, for only 2 years. He would legally be eligible to be elected to the vice presidency because he hasn't reached the 10-term limit, okay? But because he never served in the capacity of the vice presidency, it makes him ineligible. In other words, he can't be elected vice president because that term of office is 4 years. He would have to step down after 2 years, and there's nothing written in the Constitution that says he would have to step down, but he can't proceed more than 10 years. So, there's not a 10-year clause technically written in the vice presidency. It is in the presidency, the highest office in the land. So, how can Trump circumvent this if he cannot be reelected as a third term because of the 22nd Amendment? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm about to tell you may shock you, but it is possible. From a personal standpoint, I think either one of these would work. To all the law and legal scholars out there that have been pondering this idea that cannot figure out how he can get back into the presidency, there are two different ways that this can be done, and we're going to start with the first one. Now, while there is a restriction both to the 12th and the 22nd Amendment to the United States Constitution, there is nothing written currently in the U.S. Constitution that says that Trump cannot serve as Speaker of the House. Now, yes, he can. That's an elected position, appointed position. Whatever the case may be with this, there is nothing in federal law, there is nothing in any type of small print, if you will, and there's nothing written in federal law that says Trump cannot serve as the Speaker of the House. And we all have to remember that President Donald Trump is a convicted felon. Okay? He can't serve as governor of any state because he is a convicted felon. But under federal law, there's no prohibition from him serving any type of public office under the United States Constitution. There's also no law that says that Trump's second term can run out and then he can become the Speaker of the House. Now, because it is not, in this case, elected, the power of succession would take place similar to when history could repeat itself and J.D. Vance could become president and appoint whoever he wanted as his running mate. That individual, whether it be male or female, does not matter, would be elected the vice president. Trump would be the Speaker of the House and would be in line of succession. Both of those individuals would step down. Trump would succeed to the presidency. And ladies and gentlemen, you may ask yourself, Alan, is that legal? Absolutely, folks. Because he's not elected. He is going through what is called the succession steps into the presidency. Now, you have to go back and remember, back in 1974, and I'm going to bring this up again, Richard Nixon was the living proof. The late Richard Milhouse Nixon is the living proof of the circumvent of the 22nd Amendment of the United States Constitution. Spiro Agnew was vice president. He stepped down. Gerald Ford was the Speaker of the House. He excelled into the vice presidency. Nixon resigned. Ford excelled into the presidency. He was not elected. Now, in order for the word elected that is sitting on the back burner in your head to come alive, this is where it falls into place, with one of two ways that Trump can get back into office, and it be completely legal. I just explained the first one to you. Trump could be appointed, whatever the case may be, as the Speaker of the House. Both the President and Vice President would have to vacate the office. Trump would automatically become President again in a 4-year term, because that's what the term limits are set by in the U.S. Constitution, ladies and gentlemen. 4-year terms. This is one way that Donald J. Trump legally could become president again, because he would not be elected. Let's go back on the wording of the 22nd Amendment. Okay, and I left it up on the a title card all week. It limits the number of times a person can be elected to the presidency of the United States to 2. No person shall be elected to the office of president more than twice. The fifth word I just called out. No person shall be elected. Okay? So if Trump serves out his term and he is put in the position of the Speaker of the House, he's third in line. The President of the United States resigns office and the Vice President vacates the office. Donald Trump legally and by his own right can serve as President of the United States because he was not elected. He is following the line of succession. Now, I'm fixing to explain to you the second way he can do this. And honestly, I don't know which route Trump would take to be more powerful on this, but I'm going to assume it's going to be the second way that he can become president. For those of you that may not know this, ladies and gentlemen, nobody can become president of the United States unless they are certified in election through the Electoral College. Which means, basically, if you don't win Ohio, you don't get into the office of presidency. Now, go back in time, Hillary Clinton found this out. Hillary Clinton won by vote the presidency of the United States. But because she could not capture Ohio, she could not get into the office of the president. Barack Obama succeeded and went on and yah, yah, yah. Now, the second way that Donald Trump could become president again, and this would be the method I would recommend to the president if he wanted to attempt to do such. Now, before I get into that, one of the reasons I would not recommend the first thing that I told you by succession is because there would be no guarantee that the president and the vice president would vacate the office to allow Trump to serve again. You know, they could, maybe be good old boys, scratch each other's back, write each other notes. Yeah, I'm going to do this, and then turn around and not do it. Okay? Which Trump could not get into office. Again, this would be the way that Donald Trump could securely serve another term. But is it really a term? Well, yes, ladies and gentlemen, this would be defined as a term, because until the United States Constitution is ratified again, presidents can only serve 4-year terms. This is the second backdoor access that Donald Trump has to get into the office of the presidency for another term. And this is how he can do it. Everyone that votes in this country would go to the ballots. And instead of voting who is already imprinted on the ballots, you would simply write in Donald J. Trump. This would be written in across this nation on Republican ballots. You don't vote for who is already on the ballot. You write in his name on the ballot. Then when it comes time to tally up the ballots, and of course they do all of the official memorandum and canvass the ballots and everything like that, in the very end, Donald J. Trump, as a write-in, would become the next president of the United States. He would not be elected from the Electoral College because he's not on the ballot. He can't be elected because he's not imprinted already on the ballot. He can't run again, okay? And because his name is not imprinted on the presidential ballot, he cannot be elected. So what this does, ladies and gentlemen, is it puts a strong arm on the Electoral College. They can't elect him, but what they can do is appoint him as the next president of the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, this has never been done in this country. However, there is no prohibition from it being attempted or followed through with. It is very simple. The Electoral College certifies that a person has been elected to the office of the presidency of the United States. What a lot of you may not know is that the Electoral College also has the power to appoint an individual as to the office of President of the United States. So you take all of this country, you take all of the Republican voters out there, nationwide, all 50 states and the territories of the United States of America, and you write in Donald J. Trump's name on the Republican ballot, and it supersedes the imprinted names that are on the Republican ballot. Guess what happens, ladies and gentlemen? The Electoral College has no other choice but to appoint him President of the United States for the very first time in U.S. history. Now, let me throw something else up here to add to this podcast. Again, we talked about that elected presidential terms are for 4 years. There's the word elected again, ladies and gentlemen. It's restricted to 4 years. Under an appointment by the Electoral College, that wording is not present, folks. So, what does that mean? That means that the Electoral College could appoint Donald J. Trump into office as the president and set his term limit. They could legally circumvent the 22nd Amendment because he's not elected. He's appointed by the Electoral College. There's no term limit in appointment. It's not written in the U.S. Constitution. So, if every Republican in this country would write his name in it would force the Electoral College to appoint him. It would also force the Electoral College to set his term limit. They could set his term limit 5, 10 years before another legal election could take place. But it would be up to the people of this country to do that. I don't think Donald J. Trump would stand a good chance of running his term out, being elected Speaker of the House, and then the Vice President and the President step down from office to where he could succeed back into the presidency. I think, from a personal standpoint, I don't believe that would happen because, once this person is elected president, let's say J.D. Vance, our current vice president, runs for presidency, well, once he's sworn in, he's going to realize how much power he has. And, men just don't want to give that up, folks. I mean, it is what it is, okay? I think we can all agree on that perspective. So, no, from a professional and personal standpoint, yes, Donald Trump could legally do that, but I don't think that's in his best interest. His best interest is to announce his trust in the American people, the Republican side of things, and say, folks, write me in as your next president. I'm here to do the job. Then sit back, folks, and see what happens. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you right now that what I just told you, Donald Trump could legally go back, for a third term, if that's the term you want to use. He could go back into the office of the presidency and circumvent the 22nd Amendment. All Republican voters out there, omit what is already embedded on the Republican presidential voting ballot. Simply write in his name, send it in. Then at the very end, the Electoral College will see that he is the predominant winner over anybody elected to the ballots. They have no choice, folks. They have to appoint him president of the United States. And then they have to set his term limit. And this will circumvent the 22nd Amendment to the United States Constitution. I think all the legal scholars out there that were trying to figure out, and even Rudy Giuliani, Trump's attorney and all that, I think everybody was trying to figure out how to circumvent the 22nd Amendment and kept hitting brick walls because of the 12th Amendment. Pull up the 22nd Amendment, ladies and gentlemen, on your computer, on your iPads, on your smartphones, and read it. It doesn't say anything about he can't be appointed to the office of presidency. And there's only one agency that can do that, and that's the Electoral College. Of course, you would circumvent Ohio as well, because Ohio, you have to win it, but that's in an elected position. Ladies and gentlemen, the word elected should have now come out of your head, as the word elected has now become appointed to the office of the presidency of the United States. There is nothing in the Constitution that is written that says a person is restricted from being appointed to the office of the presidency. So this is Donald J. Trump's back door to get in and continue serving as president of the United States. If this holds true, ladies and gentlemen, he would become the only person to be not only appointed to the presidency, but the only person who has served 2 terms as current president to be appointed back into the same office with term limits deciding and set by the Electoral College. Ladies and gentlemen, this is major. This would set U.S. history once and for all. And a lot of you may be asking yourself, if this actually happens in this country, could the 22nd Amendment be dissolved? Yes, it could, in so many terms of the word. Congress could go back in with the vote of the people and actually demolish, if you will, remove the 22nd Amendment. From a personal standpoint, I don't believe that'll ever happen. Because, as I said at the beginning of this podcast, that we the people go to the polls to elect our leaders in this country. I think it's only fair that after a person serves 2 terms, that the American people need a fresh face. We need a fresh perspective. We need a fresh voice at the White House. This is not all these U.S. senators that can just keep running and running and running and they don't have any term limits set. For example, and I talked about the independent Bernie Sanders from Vermont. He's been up there ever since he was a child. He's been up there all of his adult life, and he's still up there. And people keep voting him back in because he's doing a good job, especially in the independent voters and the state of Vermont. That's a little bit different when it comes to the presidency, folks. Can Donald Trump do this? Yes, he can. But it will take the right end on pen and paper of the American people to circumvent the 22nd Amendment. That no person shall be elected to the office of the presidency more than twice, and no person who has held the office of president or acted as president for more than 2 years of a term to which some other person was elected president shall be elected to the office of president more than once. Again, your key word here is elected. Ladies and gentlemen, in Section 1 and Section 2 of the 22nd Amendment to the United States Constitution, does the word appointed ever appear? And that is how Donald Trump can legally become president once again. Ladies and gentlemen, we shall see in 2 years if history can be made in this country. Like I say earlier, it would be it would be the first time in the history of this country that this would take place. And it would take the write-in ballots and the confidence of the United States citizens of this country to put Trump back in office. And it doesn't seem like even the Supreme Court, the justices, can stop this action from happening if the citizens of this country decide to move forward with this procedure. And ladies and gentlemen, with that being said, that will wrap up this Sunrise Friday morning edition of The Chat. We thank you for tuning in this morning. And remember, forget the word elected. Keep the word appointed in the back of your mind in 2 years, if you decide to do this. Be sure to check our YouTube channel right here that you're listening to this podcast on, youtube.com/Alan Fitz Podcasting, for the latest topic update on future chats. And you can always visit alanfitz.com. Yeah, that's me. ALLENFITTS.com, alanfitz.com. We try to keep 1 month in advance of all the podcasts that we are going to be doing in the future. Also, each morning by 5 a.m., you can check the local live news ticker. It will have selected local news, state, national, world, and this day in history commentation on it, as well as your local Amarillo forecast down below the ticker in the right panel of the radar box. And my friends, until we meet again next Friday, have a great day today. Stay cool. Have a wonderful weekend. And until next Friday at sunrise, 6 a.m., this is Alan Fitz saying bye for now.